All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
An infamous day, a day that indeed will be wrapped in controversy for the rest of time when it comes to this country. But I'm glad we could all be together. That's what yes, I know. We'll have a report from Washington. As you know, the certification went without any kind of drama. That's good and bad, of course. We'll get into some of that. Also, updates on the domestic terrorists that dominated the news from New Orleans to Las Vegas and that explosion of the cyber truck in front of the Trump Hotel. We'll get to that. Gary Dietrich's here today. The political ninja is now navigating waters that he probably has not navigated before. Well, I mean, you got to admit, this rise of oligarchy and a Trumpian future is something that I think will challenge historians and challenge political pundits in the moment. Most of all, I'm excited that you are here the first full week of the new year. Guess who's here? It is Tony who is here today. Tony is...
Thanks, Tony.
Tony is a guy who's literally built radio stations. He is a technical ninja. So if things don't go well today, technically,
it's my fault.
I was going to say it's not your fault because, you know, you're incapable of error is what I was thinking.
We fixed the camera thing last week.
Right? Yeah, you did.
I blame you.
Yeah, it's probably my fault. That's a good point. Kim, it's sad. Kim's dad has passed away. Oh. And I told her to take as much time as she needs, you know, and we'll be here for her when she wants to return, can return. She has a lot of stuff with family, etc. So for that reason, Kim is not with us today and probably won't be with us for a few days to come. I don't know. It might be a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. I don't know how long, but I told her to take as much time as you need. So smash the like button if you're just joining us. We are a small,
with your iron rod,
homegrown show. Came out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and the backbone of this show. A lot of our listeners from KGO Radio in the Bay Area, but the show has broadened. We're on live every day, 2 to 4 o'clock in the East, 11 to 1 in the West, and we're really excited by all of the people who found the show and continue to add to our audience and share the show. Mostly that's the big way in which you can help our footprint grow. So I am going to, before I get into anything, Tony, let me just quickly look to see if there's anything in the chat that I need to attend to. This is really where I'm challenged because typically Kim does watch the chat a little bit. Lots of important things happening January 6th besides my birthday, says Jim Slayton. Jim Slayton, big shout out to your birthday. Wow. Very cool, Jim. Well, everything that's happening today, we sort of anticipated. And I suppose we anticipated your birthday if we'd known about it. But Jim's an OG from the earliest days of the show, so we wish him a very happy birthday. And I guess, what do I do here, Tony? Is there anything else I need to attend to? Seeing a lot of condolences for Kim, of course.
Definitely. There's a lot of
and it's definitely sad. Having lost my father earlier, 6 months ago, I guess it was. I know that just and many of us who have who've lost parents who we're close to can speak to the ebb and flow of emotion. You know, you think you're over it, or you think you're dealing with it, or you think you're fine, and then you're not.
Yeah, 25 years for me, and still not a day goes by.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I thought I was really completely over my father's passing. As I say, it was recent. It was in June. And my doctor called about something completely different. And it was about a month or so, or maybe even 6 weeks after Dad died. And I was fine. I said, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, and then he's going through some lab results or whatever. And then he said, I wanted to just tell you, by the way, that I'm really sorry about your father. And I just lost it. It was weird. Like, I didn't feel it coming. I didn't feel myself fragile coming to that conversation. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it takes time, and it never really is done.
No.
So we are definitely thinking of our Kim and her family, and we hope to see her again soon.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It is January 6th, and this is the day that a pro forma certification of a vote for president is typically handled in Washington, but there's nothing pro forma, there's nothing routine anymore. Under tight security, the vote was taken, and of course the certification was complete. It was not a dramatic thing at all, and there was no melodrama. And of course, the additional layer of potential drama was the fact that Vice President Kamala Harris presided over the certification, right? Just as Mike Pence was to have presided over the certification in the 2020 election. But even as the certification goes on, and you know how we feel about it, I mean, this guy is, Trump's an adjudicated insurrectionist. He is, by any reading of the Constitution, not permitted legally to take the office of the president. But laws are no good, and a constitution is no good without an enforcement mechanism that has the muscle to make it happen. And so Trump and his administration of oligarchs will take office in just a couple of weeks. And the constitutional disconnect is something that's not even really being remarked upon in many circles, certainly in no mainstream circles, and certainly in no right-wing circles. Those who were involved in that insurrection took on different roles, right? They took on the roles of the legal, trying to somehow legally undermine by going to court various certification totals of votes in states. You had to go state by state to do that. The following, that is to say, after that was unsuccessful, the following efforts were far more despicable, might be the word I'd use. The upending of the Justice Department, the installation of, or proposed installation of a new Justice Department head, Attorney General, who would declare that there were questions about the election, even though there were none. Trump giving the directive, I don't need there to actually be any evidence. I simply need you to announce, to release a statement that there were problems. And in so doing, you create an atmosphere of chaos around the election, and that would allow Trump any number of options that were on the table, one of which was declaring martial law. And then, of course, the January 6th rally, protest, and violent insurrection, takeover of the Capitol building. So as police officers and other security personnel were pounded and sprayed and attacked, there was a real question as to whether or not this nation, teetering as it was in that moment, would continue in any way with some kind of procession toward a transfer of power. And the president at that time was Donald Trump, and he watched it all, I'd suggest, with a gleeful sense of what was happening. Those were all his followers. They were doing his bidding. And he was reluctant. In fact, he was essentially watching this all as a sporting event. he had no intent to stop it, even as people were begging him, calling him, telling him this is bad for your legacy. I mean, even the Fox News people were calling him. All of these things were laid bare in the January 6th committee hearings, and we saw it played out, and that's why we say he's an adjudicated insurrectionist in Colorado. When Colorado, pointing to this and laying out these bits of evidence that I've described in kind of broad strokes, they laid that out for a court. And then that court judgment, which did again find him guilty of insurrection, that was appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, and they upheld it. And then it was kicked up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court didn't say that the lower court was wrong. They simply said this isn't a situation in which the state should have the power to remove this guy from the ballot, because that's what it was all about in Colorado, removing Trump's name because of his role as the lead insurrectionist. So what happened? I'll get to the rewriting of the history and the whitewashing of the events of J6, but what happened to many of those people who took the violent course, the last course, the attack on the Capitol? Some of those cases continue to churn on. Tony, here's a sense of this January 6th and a look back a little bit at what's happened to those who were involved in the January 6th insurrection. And
Congress is set to certify Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election today, January 6th. 4 years ago, then President Trump urged supporters to head to the Capitol to protest congressional certification of Joe Biden's victory. Nearly 1,600 people have faced charges related to the riot. Overnight, the U.S. Attorney's Office revealed it's evaluating whether to bring charges in roughly 200 new cases. Trump has promised to pardon some of the January 6th defendants. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is comparing Trump's potential pardons to recent pardons made by President Biden.
As we've discovered under the Biden administration, the pardon authority is a very broad one. I mean, he's taken it to a whole new level.
As the majority leader in the Senate, though, what message do you think it would send to give pardons to people who pleaded guilty to attacking police officers who stormed this building 4 years ago?
Well, look, I mean, again, it's ultimately going to be a decision that the President of the United States, the pardon authority exists with him.
As one of her last official acts as vice president, Kamala Harris today will certify her own loss. President Biden is asking Americans not to forget the events of January 6, 2021, writing in the Washington Post, quote, "We cannot accept a repeat of what occurred 4 years ago." And speaking about Trump, Biden said, quote, "I think what he did was a genuine threat to democracy, and I'm hopeful that we're beyond it." Security is much tighter around the Capitol than 4 years ago, with extensive fencing and new training in place. Law enforcement in Washington also preparing for the state funeral of former President Jimmy Carter. Carter's body will remain in Atlanta through today before making the trip to D.C. for Thursday's funeral, where President Biden will deliver the eulogy. Thousands of extra police officers are brought in with hundreds of soldiers on standby, and the D.C. National Guard activated to protect both Carter's funeral and today's election certification. And now the snowstorm hitting Washington is not expected to affect today's events. Even if the government is closed, we expect the election certification to go forward.
Well, as we told you, it has gone forward and the certification went down. You know, I think it's not a small matter on some level, just from a standpoint of messaging, that Joe Biden wrote that op-ed. I like that he wrote it. It was nothing we didn't know. A lot of what he said, I said even at the open of this show. He kind of recapitulated events of the day. He talked about the transfer of power. And I'm trying to find you a quote that might, reflect sort of the best of that piece. I found it to be, typical Biden. And again, I'm not saying that Biden is always with it and always sharp. And obviously we've seen his mental acuity diminish. But I think his general policies and general statements that come out of the White House, I don't really have a problem with. And he said, after all what we all witnessed on January 6, 2021, we know we can never again take this for granted. He doesn't mention Trump directly, but he says an unrelenting effort has been underway to rewrite, even erase, the history of that day, to tell us we didn't see what we all saw with our own eyes. We cannot allow the truth to be lost. And of course, he vowed that the certification this year would be handled peacefully, and it was indeed. He says, but on this day, we cannot forget, we should commit to our remembering January 6, 2021, every year, to remember it as a day when our democracy was put to the test and prevailed, to remember that democracy, even in America, is never guaranteed. The Trump response is something quite different. Trump views many of those who were part of January 6th as freedom fighters. I mean, when I say he views them that way, he knows the truth. But he has now twisted and perverted the day's events and the history that we all know to create this bizarre patriotism around an attempted violent takeover. I mean, it was violent, but the attempt was the takeover. They talk about a transition. They're always saying, oh, no, we want to have a smooth transition from party to party of government. That was Trump talking to radio host. Well, they're making it really difficult. They're throwing everything they can in the way. This is Donald Trump 101. You know, he takes a serious threat to democracy and he twists it into some patriotic act. And the other thing that he's done, and this is really quite concerning, is he's turned this horrifying narrative that played out on January 6th, 2021, into this, and it's an evolution. That's why I mentioned this. You can watch it happen into this aura of patriotism matched with a kind of love that one should have for those who were involved. And this is a guy who was, you know, pulled back from the brink. You've heard me say it before. I mean, Donald Trump was done, man. Done after January 6th. Even his closest allies, Lindsey Graham. McConnell, I wouldn't call him an ally, but he was blocking for Trump, I mean, legislatively. Both of them and all of them. McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy in the House. These are all people who stood up and said, I've had enough. I mean, Lindsey Graham literally said, I've had enough. I'm not doing this anymore. And then Trump, who seemed mortally wounded politically, reconstituted himself, continued to have tremendous political power, and the gravitational force associated with MAGA Nation brought all of those people to whom I've just referred, brought them back into the fold. And they all went, in some manner, literally went to Mar-a-Lago and then sucked up to him, apologized to him, connected with him in some way, pledged a fealty to him that we've seen continue. So Trump again rose to power, and this is the greatest reconstitution of political power in the history of this country. To be as completely decimated as Trump was, lost the election, lost appeals, clearly involved in an insurrection, adjudicated as such, and somehow gets back on the stump, back on television. He's a captivating figure, charismatic figure, a total con artist, a total BS machine. And he got out there with conservative media led by Fox News Channel carrying his water, and he played J6 as patriotic acts that were carried out by the most patriotic Americans. He has the national anthem sung by those who were imprisoned, convicted and imprisoned for their roles in the January 6th insurrection. And now he has the platform as president to further change this Capitol riot into a day of patriotic devotion to him and to the Constitution or whatever other things he wants to throw in. Because it's going to be a day in which they start to salute the J6 rioters. This has happened, you know, I hate to say this because this is a completely, I suspect, overused, and whenever it's mentioned, it's sort of this radioactive comparison when you mention Hitler. But I'm going to mention Hitler only because it was his same dance that he did when he took on the Weimar Republic, and there was a huge, not so dissimilar in the sense that there was a huge confrontation in which I think somewhere around 7 police officers, German police officers were killed, and 14 of Hitler's supporters were killed, and they end up imprisoning Hitler for a year. That's when he wrote Mein Kampf. And he emerged from that, this troubled, you'd think, stained, and impossible political figure to imagine that he could rise from that into a place of power. And I don't need to tell you what happened with the Third Reich. So the important thing as related to that narrative, which is why I wanted to mention it, is that Hitler turned that confrontation with the Weimar Republic. He turned that officially into a day of remembrance for those who stood up for him against the government of Germany. And that's what Trump is doing with his J6 supporters. He's talked about and will likely pardon many of them. And he is going to change the way that officially, at least in Washington, January 6th is viewed. We know the truth, but now in a position of power, he can reframe the Capitol riot in a completely different way. There was a good piece on this, the Mark Thompson Show. I just wish that Congress would invoke the 14th Amendment, Section 3, on the floor to put it on the books, even if they would lose that for the sake of integrity, says Chris Moore. Thank you for the $10 super chat. You're right, Chris, and we talked about this in the last couple of weeks. As I started the show by saying, it is insanity to me that someone who is a fully adjudicated insurrectionist can ascend to the presidency. I mean, it is illegal, but you've got to have some institution enforcing that law, and you must have Congress to do it. And Congress is cowed completely by the political heft that Donald Trump has. And so without Congress, you saw it happen. Mitch McConnell kicked the can down the road. When the House adjudicated the events of January 6th, they turned them over to the Senate. The way impeachment works in this country, of course, is impeaching is sort of like indicting. It's a charge. It's brought to the House. It passed the House with bipartisan support, moves to the Senate, and the Senate kicked the can down. The Senate, that became the center of gravity for Donald Trump to slip away from being held to account. And so you saw McConnell say, well, this is something we should handle on the outside. Then you saw Merrick Garland kick the can even further. He was a Democrat. Leave aside party affiliation. I mean, it's a question of legality. You're the lead justice officer in the land, and you don't see anything here to follow up on? It's outrageous. And I've talked to you about the way I view Merrick Garland. I view him, I think all of this sits at his feet. I mean, you can go back before that. You can go to Biden for the appointment of Merrick Garland, et cetera. You can go, there is blame to go around, but I put Merrick Garland, if not at the head of the parade, pretty close to the head of the parade, because you legitimately, without any kind of patina of political vengeance, could bring charges to Trump right away. The J6 committee laid it all bare, and that's the only reason that Garland stepped up. I thought it's inexcusable, absolutely inexcusable. So even as these 1,600 defendants pleaded guilty and 200 or more have been convicted after the trial, I stand aghast at the fact that the riot on January 6th will be reconstituted as a patriotic act. I mean, despite all the condemnation, despite all of the obvious realizations of what happened, there are complete fabrications as to who was behind the riot. I mean, I was at a dinner with somebody who's a MAGA adjacent type guy, and he said, well, I think Antifa was really there whipping up the crowd. There were a lot of leftists in that crowd. Really? So that's a fabrication. I mean, that there were FBI agents probably embedded in that crowd, I have no doubt. I mean, I think that was a security measure, but that they were behind whipping up the crowd and trying to produce this violence, to what end? How does that even make sense? How does that narrative even hold any water? Like, what was the plan then? Yeah. So they wanted to, you're telling me the incoming administration wanted to whip up a riot to overturn their victory? Or I don't quite get it. But the minute you mention a deep state conspiracy and you mention any number of narratives that are completely invented, you begin to open the door to letting those who were involved in January 6th off the hook for what they did, and then an even more loathsome transition into the fact that those involved with January 6th at the Capitol are elevated to some perch associated with a patriotic act. It's so grotesque that it just astounds me on another level. But that is the successful dance that has been done by right-wing media and this former president and now president-elect Donald Trump. So
The Mark Thompson Show.
we will, you can say, dude, I love this stuff. This is hilarious watching you guys clutch your pearls. I'm not pearl clutching, dude. I'm telling it straight. Why don't you do me a favor, Bapes? Why don't you hit me with a comment that actually speaks to specifics as opposed to, oh, I love seeing you libs just kind of, you know what I mean? I mean, I read your comment. There you go. Maybe that you can high-five your buddies for the day. But hit me with a specific. If you want to argue this point, argue it with me. But don't just take a victory lap because you guys gamed a system and are gaming the information system within that system. Anyway, I want to get to Gary Dietrich on this, so can I do that? Here's
The Mark Thompson Show.
Smash that like button like a boss. Do it
Smash
like you...
it with your iron rod.
Yeah, smash it with your iron rod. We're closing in on 84th. I think we have 84,000 subscribers, which is really cool for this. It's a homegrown show out of KGO Radio in San Francisco, and we've grown beyond that and beyond California, although I do have a little bit later in the show some California-specific stories that are really, I picked them specifically because of our listeners, so I will get to that. I do want to get to a guy who is, I was saying before, and I'll ask Gary, whether or not he agrees. I don't care how long you've been a political pundit. There's stuff going on in this country now that you've not seen before. Now you can, I think, with the kind of history that Gary Dietrich has had, you can find magnetic north and help the rest of us find magnetic north in a way that we wouldn't be able to find maybe without some help. But I still challenge even the great Gary Dietrichs of the world to somehow frame all of this in a way that we can better understand. He is the political pundit and political analyst for iHeartRadio and across the CBS television network. How about it for our Monday regular, Gary Dietrich, everybody. Looking good, sir. Happy New Year.
Hey, Happy New Year to you too, Mark. And I know for some in our audience, and including you, today, a very mixed day in many ways. I understand that, but still, Happy New Year. The page gets turned. Here we go. We're on to another one. And if you want me to real quick, Mark, comment on what the intro there about kind of putting this in modern political perspective, I'm happy to do that.
Please.
Okay. Well, here's the deal. I've been doing this over 30 years and based out of the state capitol here in Sacramento, which, by the way, no question about it, in light of the Trump ascendancy version 2, I mean, California is going to be, in Sacramento more specifically, going to be ground zero. I mean, it's going to be ground zero for everything that doesn't come out of D.C. and the administration, both because of Gavin Newsom, because we'll see what Kamala Harris comes back to the state and does. Is she going to run for governor in 2 years? Is she not? Is she going to make another bid for 28 and announce that, in the next year or so? Who knows? I mean, her people say she doesn't really know yet. She's got 2 weeks more to serve as vice president, and then we'll see. But there's that piece of it. The other piece of it is a very interesting poll that came out, and this is going to upset some people, but it's the numbers that CNN came up with. And that is, they asked people, okay, so is January 6th and all the stuff surrounding that, which I think there's widespread consensus that was not a good day, there'll be some exceptions to that in the hard right, but for the most part, people know it wasn't good. Even though people sort of agree with that sentiment, Mark, the number of people that CNN polled have said, this is a top issue. This is something that, influenced my vote. It's something that was really like number one priority to me. The number, 5%. And that is why Democrats, interestingly, though you're absolutely right, going into 24, I said, look, people, you think you saw crazy in 2016, excuse me. You think you saw crazy in 2020. You haven't seen crazy yet. You're going to see it in 24. And that's exactly what we saw. It was unprecedented in so many different ways, from assassination attempts for candidates to a sitting president stepping aside 3 months before the election. I mean, so many things happened. But at the end of the day, as they used to say in my classes at Harvard, Mark, the bottom line, people said, the economy, my job, gas prices, immigration, whatever, are more important than those issues.
That's interesting because, by the way, Tony, I don't know, but make sure that Gary's not too hot on his level because he's a hot personality. I just want to make sure people don't. It's interesting you say that because I was hearing in internal polling they were doing in the lead up to the election that the J6 thing was a big deal to people. And you're saying just the opposite. That, I mean, put another way, 95% of the people polled didn't give an S about J6.
Well, I want to nuance that a little bit, Mark. They cared, okay? They weren't happy about what happened 4 years ago. I want to be really clear about this. It wasn't that they didn't care, especially the majority of the Democrats, but even about 20% or so Republicans said, now that was not a good thing. But was it going to be determinative of their vote? That's what Democrats, remember, were counting on as clearly one of their top three issues, along with abortion. Maybe after that, distant climate change and some other things. But remember, it was about process. It was about protecting democracy. And it was also about abortion. Well, that issue of democracy and of January 6th, it had faded so much in people's consciousness relative to what they were experiencing every time they went to the gas station, the grocery store, their own jobs. See where I'm going with this? It was just in terms of prioritization, not determinative of their vote. And of course, the outcome validated that that in all these states, over 90% of U.S. counties saw a drift, an increase in the vote towards Republicans, towards Trump, to varying degrees, of course. But that said something, and that was people were not happy with the current direction of the country. And we knew that from polling where people said they were very dissatisfied with the direction of the United States.
This goes to public perception of what issues are most important. And when it gets to that, it always strikes me that it gets to messaging and media, what's out there. I think the right has a great media machine. The left less so. You may look at things, not you personally, but one may look at things and say, hey, well, look at MSNBC and CNN. They're not lefties of the sort that you see the loyal righties are on Fox News Channel. I mean, I saw a lower third super with it was a Trump rally or something, and it literally was finally a real president speaks. I mean, it was like I'm thinking that is not a lower third super you would ever see on CNN or on MSNBC in any kind of way. So I see the right-wing media as having carried a lot of water for Trump and the right, and having characterized some of those issues to which you've referred, and all of them resonate. I suspect they all resonate and land. But I think they characterize them as perhaps those that Trump could make a difference on more than he actually could. We know he can't influence gas prices. We know the president can't influence egg prices. The bird flu, which we're going to talk about later in the show, that's having a big effect on egg prices as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is media, and finally social media, has had a huge effect on American political discourse. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. Let's separate out politics and policy for just a second. On the political side, you have...
Well, we lost Gary for a second. What happened to my Gary? I blame you, Tony.
His connection was getting a little spotty, so
was
we'll
it?
see if he
Okay.
comes back. Yeah.
He was coming in a little hot, people are saying, but maybe
Just
not.
at the beginning, my God,
Oh, yeah.
I can't adjust a microphone until I hear it. Sorry.
Of course, it's okay. It's
I'm
okay.
just gonna, sorry,
Right,
Jack.
I
I blame you.
Okay,
Fine
it's my
after
fault
that.
somehow, probably, yeah.
Sorry. I'll kick him so he reconnects is what I'll do.
Yeah, we'll get Gary back. But, gosh, Gary is so smart. There he is.
He's back.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Am I back?
Gary with an alternative. Yeah, good job.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am
All right,
sorry,
please, you were
guys.
saying,
My
no problem.
apologies.
So you were saying
Somebody was
you were
calling
saying
in.
you were
This is a huge day. I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. You were saying let's separate. We were talking about social media and the different media in the discourse.
Right.
So go ahead. You were
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just a quick bifurcation here. So on the politics of things and the communication of politics, absolutely no question that over the last, say, 2 election cycles, especially, the rise and influence of social media has been tremendous. Okay. And here's an interesting thing about that. Democrats themselves have now, there's a lot of mea culpa going on inside the Democratic Party that, for example, when it came to things like certain podcasts, right? And I don't need to mention names, you pretty much know who they are, but national podcast influencers, Democrats have said, we missed the boat on that the Trump people had tens of millions of views that we missed out on, some of which purposely, like the Joe Rogan podcast that they did not put Kamala Harris on. Most of them now say that was a big mistake because we did not get the views. We didn't get the airtime that Trump did. So I want to, say that there's that. On the policy side of things, here's something else really interesting. If you pull the political camera back, pan it even further, Mark, to borrow a Hollywood term, what you're seeing now, take a look at what happened to Trudeau today in Canada, stepping down as prime minister. Why is that significant? Because it was a real interesting thing. If people know Fareed Zakaria over on CNN, who does a pretty good job of analyzing things in terms of international politics, he did a very interesting piece. I encourage people to watch, about 5-minute piece over the weekend on progressive administrations globally, in different nations, what has been their political fate in the last 2 to 4 years. And he said almost universally, they have either left or their power has decreased, and Canada being the most recent sign of that. Why is he pointing that out? Because he said part of the problem is people's perception is that those progressive administrations were not central and sensitive to their main concerns: crime, immigration negative impacts, the economy, et cetera. So he's painting it more in a global picture, that there's more of a shift away from progressive politics, interestingly, more globally, not just in the United States right now.
That's fascinating and concerning, isn't it? And I like that you reference the Trudeau situation because, well, what was he in there 9 years? I mean, he was a Canadian head.
Actually, 11 years, believe it or not, he's been in there.
So, I mean, I think him stepping down is more than just like a footnote. It may be a sign of a watershed moment. And we've seen the rise of these autocracies. I mean, it's more than just the recession of progressive policies. We've seen the rise of the right across the rest of the globe, and we've seen the rise of these autocracy. I think of like a Viktor Orban. It's like a soft fascism. It's not the kind that we're used to seeing in those black and white pictures of World War II. And you know what I mean, Gary? It seems to me as though if there were to be a rise like that in this country, it might take on that kind of face, the face that we've seen in Hungary, for example.
Well, I think, it's always hard in politics to paint everything with one gigantic brush. So you're going to have people sort of non-progressive politics, call them more conservative. Some people call them clear out to the fascists, which of course Trump got labeled that. But the point of the matter is, there's a rightward or at least center-right drift is the point that Sicario was making. And I think that's pretty undeniable when you look at who's been elected. Are there going to be people way out on the fringes on both sides? Certainly. I think it's going to be really interesting, for example, Mark, new president of Mexico, okay? A female president, not typical for most in Mexican politics over time. But who's going to be the new prime minister at our northern border? And those two relationships, I think, are going to be very interesting because Trump, of course, is going to be moving things certainly more center right. And, the president of Mexico, not so much right now. And we'll see where the new PM of Canada goes. But I think that, right on our borders, there's going to be interesting dynamics. What's going to happen with immigration with those two nations? What's going to happen with tariffs with those two nations? Trump, of course, has made a threat, 25% increases. We'll see if that takes effect. Some people think that was part of Trudeau's downfall, that he didn't stand up to that more strongly. So I just think it's going to be really interesting to see, even on our adjacent neighbors, how this international political scene plays out.
Donald Trump, despite what he says, Gary Dietrich, about how the economy's never been in worse shape, we're the laughingstock of the world, he's inheriting the best economy since George Bush took office. And I'm just wondering how long it'll take with some of the things even to which you've referred, with the tariffs. And, he's not a guy to kind of just leave things alone. He just can't wait to lift his leg on a lot of different things. Again, these are my these are my thoughts, not yours. But I'm just curious from the way you look at things. And he is, along with his people, I'd call them henchmen, but again, those are I have a very arch, biased way of looking at it, perhaps. But I guess all I'd say is his advisors and he seem spring-loaded to start making some changes. Dangerous, maybe, in a situation where the economy is really in pretty good health, even as Americans struggle, I understand, in ways in which Trump was able to exploit politically. I mean, legitimately exploit politically. I don't mean to say that was a bad exploitation.
Well, I think what's interesting now is you don't have unanimity amongst economists and amongst business people about what the broader Trump agenda is going to do to the economy. In other words, there are people very concerned about tariffs. If they jump too fast, too quick, what effect is that going to have? Oil prices, people are wondering, hey, drill, baby, drill. And if Trump is successful in moving some of that agenda forward, especially in the next year or two, is that going to have a dampening effect? Some people think it's going to, on gas prices, on energy costs, and that will be helpful to the economy. Trump's tax cuts, are those going to get extended? And what effect will that have on the economy? So there's a lot of unknowns, Mark. Where is the mortgage interest rate going to go? Everybody looks at it as sort of like a middle class benchmark for how people are feeling. Is the housing market, which has kind of been in the doldrums the last year, is it going to be jump-started if we see the Fed begin to bump down that rate more significantly? So there's a lot of unknowns. Anybody that tells you they can, say definitively what's going to happen to the economy, it's that old joke about, an economist, you might as well flip a coin. That's about as good as you're going to get in terms of getting a PhD in economics.
You know, we started with this, and I'll circle back around to it, Gary. What do you think Trump and his people clearly wanting to, in some way, reimagine the way January 6th is viewed by history, reconstitute January 6th in some way? He's talked about pardoning the J6ers. He has that national anthem that they're all, those who are incarcerated, singing verses of. What do you think the realities are? And again, I'm sorry, a lot of what we do, I do ask you to maybe, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you really understand the political landscape with the detail that many of us don't. What do you think the reality is concerning him being able to, in some way, reimagine this day in American history as an act of patriotism on the part of his supporters?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to change many minds when it comes to something that stark. For example, are people going to change their minds about whether this is a patriotic act or not? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's pretty well baked in. We know that from polling. Those numbers have not really changed. What has changed is what I shared earlier. How important is that perspective on J6 going forward? I think, American politics is very notorious for being very what's happening right now, okay? Like, we're going to face another election cycle now in 22 months, okay? People are going to be voting again. That could have a huge effect if Trump does not, and Republicans are not able to hold on to the House, probably not going to get the Senate. We can dive into that another time, why the mechanics of the seats up in 26 don't lend themselves to Democrats, but the House is up for grabs. There's no question about it. Historically, especially in a second term, presidents don't do well increasing their majority. Republicans are very well aware of this, okay? So, the bottom line is I don't think people change their minds about January 6th. I think what they're going to, the Trump people, I think, are hoping they'll change their view of a Trump legacy based on what he's able to accomplish this second time around. I mean, if his administration does not do well, if the economy falters, if there's significant international issues that he cannot get under control, I don't think, people are going to look very favorably on a second Trump term. And they're not going to blame January 6th. They're going to say, we're blaming ourselves for reelecting you. Okay. So that's the way it's going to look. I just think going into 26 and then especially 28, where it's going to be wide open on both sides and a new president's going to come in one way or another, I think those are going to be, Mark, the real markers about how people, whether January 6th is at that point a complete faded memory, or whether it's like, you know what, maybe that had some more resonance than I thought because these last 4 years have sucked.
The poll to which you referred at the beginning of our conversation about where J6 ranked in terms of importance for those polled, and it didn't rank at the top, is that the reason you think that Democrats didn't cry foul in this election in some way? We hear and have been party to a lot of questions about the election. I mean, you can go all the way to manipulation, or you can just go to, gosh, there are issues involving Russian interference and other aspects of the election that call everything a bit more suspect than we're hearing. The Democrats went quietly. I mean, Harris conceded, and there has been no call for recounts in any way. The 14th Amendment questions that seem to be demonstrably there. I mean, an adjudicated insurrectionist, adjudicated in Colorado in the J6 hearing as well, hearings and impeachment. So none of these things seem to take traction. Is the reason for all of that what you talked about at the beginning of this conversation, which is because of politics? This is something that Democratic politicians just didn't want to talk about because it just doesn't land with the American people in as important a way as it should, in their view.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Mark. I think there's a widespread view amongst many, even in Congress, Democrats that got elected in Congress, we missed the boat on this election. We were not talking about the right things. And they based that on the second component, which is, Trump not only winning every single swing state, and we went down those swing states, Mark, ad infinitum, and what might be vulnerable and what wasn't, and what were the important issues there. Well, you know what? It turned out that this January 6th, this democracy issue did not resonate, okay? Not only in individual swing states, but nationally. When Trump won the popular vote is when I think it put to rest any thought of like questioning the outcome of this election, right? Now, people could talk about it all they want, but I think, even James Carville has come out, as others like him, long in the tooth Democrats, who've been through a lot of cycles, said, you know what, we weren't talking about the right stuff. And I think that is to your point. It's sort of like now it's a very interesting nuance that you're beginning to hear come out of Democrats in Congress, both in the House and the Senate. Look, we have to find ways to work with Trump. We're not going to oppose him wholesale like we did 8 years ago, but I think they're looking at crafting a more nuanced message that gets back to some of their core focus with folks in labor, folks in the middle class, and as they say, doesn't focus on politics and process going on that kitchen table.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and that's interesting, the failure of the Democrats to connect with the populace in any kind of significant number, that might be it, that they are so shamed, maybe. Like when you mentioned Carville, I mean, I think that's what that's all about. His penance is going on, YouTube and, declaring how he missed the boat on this and how Democrats missed the boat. And you end up with this, the lessons learned thing that we're kind of seeing there in that still frame of Carville talking. I mean, you see them going through the ashes of this election, having maybe learned a lesson. Last thing, super last thing for you. I feel as though Americans and most people vote with their gut. And I think once their gut tells them something, then they fill in a lot of details like, oh, it's the price of eggs. Oh, it's whatever it might be. It's the immigrants, et cetera. Give them the reasons they're voting for you. But the real reason they're voting for you is because of a je ne sais quoi. I mean, I think Trump is in a legitimately charismatic figure. I think he is an effective, for me, in my judgment, he's a con man. He's a BS artist. But to his credit, he BS'd a very BSable public into, again, the greatest reconstitution of a political life in the history of this country, in my judgment. The Democrats, I don't see a rising charismatic figure. Do you?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. We're talking already about the bench for 2028 and who's going to lead the party sort of in a de facto state between now and then. I mean, in the past, we even had Nancy Pelosi, right? Pretty strong figure in Congress. You don't have that in Hakeem Jeffries, and most people, hard pressed to even the average person on the street to tell you that Chuck Schumer's the leader of Democrats in the Senate, right? So I think there is a wide open field. What is the role of a Gavin Newsom going to be? What is the role of a Josh Shapiro out of Pennsylvania going to be? His state, of course, did not get carried for the Democrats, which raised some questions for people about his political power and future. What's going to be the future of Kamala Harris? Is she going to be given another shot? Is she going to be seen as, okay, well, now that she has sort of a level playing field, a clean slate, she'll do better? Well, there's real mixed feelings about that inside the Democratic Party. I will go back to one thing about Trump that I think is very interesting that you make, I think, an important point on, Mark, and that is personality, okay? And I really do believe that one of the tipping points in Trump's favor, and it was tragic, certainly on one hand, but that assassination attempt where he actually came away bloodied, I think softened Trump's image in a way that many people didn't fully account for. That there was a sense of, oh my gosh, this guy's human. And he literally came an inch away from being killed, right? I think there was something about that, it's just in the American spirit. It was, I don't know if endearing is the right word, but certainly it just started with people, wow, this is a guy. Okay, I know he seems like a cartoonish figure, but he's a guy, okay, with a wife and with kids, and he almost got killed and he was bleeding out of his ear. I mean, you hear where I'm going with this? I think that did something to personalize the former, now the newly elected president in a way that probably few things could have.
Well, he sold a lot of sneakers from it, I'll tell you that. I'm sorry. It is a serious thing, and yet he made it, he couldn't wait to sell sneakers around it. It was crazy. I mean, there is this weird marriage of the insanely serious, to which you just referred with an assassination attempt, and then the utterly absurd, like SNL level ridiculousness of selling merch around your assassination attempt. It's absolutely nuts. So I understand, but that's our new daddy, and we have to kind of get our head around it. Daddy does weird stuff. Gary, I love you. You take my... I understand, admittedly, I'm an open partisan. I'm not a Trump fan. You take the stuff, I dump it on your table, and somehow you make it a beautiful thing and an understandable thing. I'm so grateful for your involvement with the show. Happy New Year, pal, and I look forward to a lot more conversation. Thank you.
Here's to a great year ahead, Mark.
Gary Dietrich, everybody. Thanks, Gary. By the way, Gary is, of course, the CBS analyst and also the analyst for iHeart radio stations, but his segment here is sponsored by Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. And let me tell you, particularly my Northern California friends, if you are relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional, and that highly respected real estate professional is Bill Campbell of Remax Gold. Call or text Bill 530-448-7474. 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Gary.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this?
We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at? Stay at home and get baked.
Right on, everybody. Happy New Year to all of you who have found us. Appreciate Gary's thoughts. You know, I am not a Trump fan, and I think these are days with question marks ahead of them, but I welcome opposing opinions, and even in our chat, I welcome opposing opinions. And you'll see this also. D. Elliott, I don't believe he won on the swing states. Kamala won. He cheated, you see. It's again, this is the range of opinions that you will find. And again, you find people like James Carville, and Gary was talking about Carville, who obviously feels as though, hey, Democrats were defeated fair and square, and they got to do some real looking through the ashes of the election to figure out exactly what happened and what went wrong. I know there are many of you, or some of you, who are also heavy partisans on the right and big Trumpers who come into this show, and you're welcome here. Again, I'm open about the fact that I'm not a Trump fan, and I'm happy to take on any conversations and questions about facts. But if you're just here to go, oh, you're all a bunch of libs or whatever, you're calling us names. So just so you know, the policy is we yellow card just name calling. Okay, so if you're just name calling with no facts and no real argument, we'll yellow card you. That's a warning, okay? And then ultimately, you'll be red carded if you keep that going. So anyway, so here is one from somebody who started with a bit of name calling, but then it maybe evolved to something else. The laughability of you claiming this vast right-wing media monster influencing things while completely ignoring the flip side of the coin is just too precious. Well, you say that, Bapes, but I think that what I'm saying is defensible from the standpoint of media. I mean, just look at the media landscape. And let's just evaluate it objectively, okay? You and I will objectively evaluate it. You've got the most powerful cable news outlet out in the history of cable news, Fox News Channel, which completely carries the water for Trump and for the right. They have rewritten and reconstituted the history of January 6th, Trump's history, and they've gone on a jihad against Biden, Hunter Biden, Biden crime family, etc. So you've seen it, and that pursuing of Biden. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should rotisserie the president. Go for it. But if you watch Fox News Channel, you see it to the exclusion of all else. And so the deeds of Donald Trump go completely orphaned. So even as I read your comment, when you talk about the flip side of the coin, I just don't think you find that at MS and CNN. Now, I will say this. I think mainstream media, to whatever extent they were aware of the diminution of Biden's mind and mental acuity, I do think they ignored it, or they didn't know about it, or there was a willful ignorance or whatever. So on that, I will give you something. But the idea somehow that MS and CNN are in any way comparable to Fox News Channel, it just doesn't hold water. But even more important, Fox News Channel has a much bigger audience. And by the way, those are voters. That demographic around Fox News Channel, those are seniors. Seniors vote. So all I'm trying to say is, and we even had a guest here who was part of the 14th Amendment crew. You know, they're trying to essentially argue and do argue and went to Washington to argue further that Donald Trump should never have even been certified in this election, never is ineligible because of his role in the insurrection. Well, you don't hear any of that on any of MS or CNN. And those people involved with it, some of them, one of the lead people was a guest here last week. She said she was sucked in by Fox News Channel. She ended up as a staffer for Trump. And I asked her, well, how did you get wrapped up in that? And now here you clearly are someone who is trying to undermine his certification based on the Constitution. She said, it was 24/7 of Fox News Channel. She said, I just believed that propaganda. So it's a very effective propaganda machine, and you kind of blow it off like I'm being ridiculous when I ignore the flip side. Fox, that's just Fox News Channel, okay? And I'm wrapping up, but let me just tell you one other big part of this. When you look at the Sinclair Broadcastings of the world, these are enormous broadcast chains. They own radio and television stations from coast to coast, and they are heavy right-wing. And so that propaganda is played out across all of those television and radio stations. You can drive from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, and you'll never lose the frequency of a right-wing radio station. They're in all of those municipalities, towns, cities across the country. There's that kind of dominance of right-wing talk radio. That has an effect. So when you talk about ignoring the flip side, what's the flip side? Tell me, CNN and MSNBC, they're tepid compared to what we've seen on Fox News Channel. So, and then when you write this, I have to, again, I put you in a yellow card category. Nothing anyone could ever present to you half-wits could even change your minds. You're unhinged hypocrites. You lose. They won. Get over it. And so I'm okay with even your unhinged hypocrites. I'm okay with that. You can say that and you can get away with it on this channel. You lose, they won, get over it. I can live with that. I won't live with you again saying half-wits. So you don't call us half-wits here and you're okay. But this is a gift to you that I don't yellow card you yet. Okay, so that's all I'm asking you to do. Normally, by the way, I'm not the guy watching this. Kim is brutal. She would have thrown you out already. But I don't. I have a much higher tolerance. So all I'm asking you for is a little modicum of respect in the name calling. Trump is not qualified to be president, says Carol Perkins. The Supreme Court ignored the Constitution. Trump is illegitimate as president. Well, there's certainly that view of things. Time to take it to the streets, says Benaloco. I mean, there was that attempt to make the point in Washington today from Jessica Denson and those around her. The weather in Washington and the East, as you know, is brutal. So they've had to bear up under some pretty brutal climactic conditions. By the way, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I've been invited to the inauguration a couple of times, and I've never gone. Why? Can you guess? It's incredibly cold. It's the most uncomfortable, awful. I mean, it's just, I understand the institution that's associated with the inauguration is an august one. It's a big-time thing. But, man, it will test anybody's tolerance. You're out there for hours, and the cold is biting. So I give anybody credit, most of all those like Jessica Denson and others who are protesting and bringing attention and making noise around the question of the 14th Amendment and Trump's eligibility as an adjudicated insurrectionist. I give them mad credit just for being out there because of those weather conditions. Pamela Kirby, while I feel in despair today, your show with its truth and intelligence keeps me from stepping off the wharf into Santa Cruz. Just being dramatic, I could swim to shore. Pamela Kirby, thank you. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for a $20 super chat. That's very, very cool. Yeah, I know there's a ton going on. And, of course, Jim Slayton's birthday, as noted earlier. There's a lot going on, but this is the America that is going to unfold in a big, big way. And so I think we have to, on some level, get to a place where we're dealing with issues and what's happening. And in that spirit, we're going to try to do that here. You know, at some point, you need to move to what's being done in Washington and beyond. So smash the like button if you would. It helps us in the world of YouTube. I don't really understand how.
Smash it with your iron rod.
But it does. And I appreciate everybody being here. I want to get into some law and disorder, which is related to, you know, as all things are, it seems, the president-elect, as it turns out, there is some development.
The Mark Thompson Show.
In addition to the president-elect being involved, I'd suggest that there is sort of a history of these one-offs now, both in New Orleans and in the Cybertruck explosion outside the Trump Hotel. Tony, if you're ready, we can do it. Let's do some law and disorder.
In the criminal justice system, the people,
pimps, addicts, thieves, bums, winos, girls who can't keep an address, and men who don't care,
are represented by two separate yet equally important groups.
A cop, a flatfoot, a bull, a dick, John Law, you're the fuzz, the heat, you're poison, you're trouble, you're bad news.
These are their stories.
The New Orleans cops and political officials, those in charge of Bourbon Street and beyond, were warned that Bourbon Street was vulnerable to a car ramming. City leaders were warned in a 2019 physical security assessment that tourist-packed Bourbon Street was vulnerable to a vehicle ramming attack because some of the existing blockade mechanisms were inoperable. The warning proves painfully real, of course, 5 years later on New Year's Day, when that Shamsuddin Jabbar drove through pedestrians and over pedestrians on Bourbon Street, 14 people killed, dozens injured. It was a truck ramming and gunfire attack. He'd proclaimed his support for ISIS. New Orleans first installed metal security barriers on Bourbon Street in 2017 following the 2016 truck terror attack on Bastille Day. That was in France, remember, in Nice? That same year, a report prepared by the infrastructure consulting firm that was hired by New Orleans noted that Bourbon Street is, quote, often densely packed with pedestrians, presenting a risk and target for terrorism. 2 years later, a security assessment prepared for the French Quarter Management District by the security firm of a different group faulted the bollards that had been installed. They said some of these bollards, those are these big, there they go. You see some of them. Some of these bollards are inoperable for a number of reasons. Some were broken, some were kept down for ease of use. This assessment is a brutal one. Bollards were not up, this is a quote, because they are near completion with the expectation of being completed by Super Bowl, according to the New Orleans mayor. The New Orleans mayor continues, because the city of New Orleans is hosting the Super Bowl this year, it gave the city of New Orleans an opportunity to go further and deeper with infrastructure improvements. So cops, as you know, we talked about this last week, parked a cruiser to block Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve. The police superintendent says we did have a plan, but the terrorists defeated it. Of course, the reality is you left a huge gap along the sidewalks where a vehicle could just turn and take advantage of that essential soft spot in your plan to protect the public. Meantime, there are realities around the Cybertruck guy that are eerily familiar. Tony, do you have a little bit of that? Here's a little bit of a roll-in on that.
I failed him. We all failed him.
The ex-girlfriend of Matthew Livelsberger, the man who carried out the Las Vegas blast in front of the Trump Hotel, opening up about their final messages. Alicia Errett hadn't heard from her ex-boyfriend, Livelsberger, a decorated U.S. Army Special Forces soldier, in over 2 years, when she says he started texting her on December 27th out of the blue, asking how she was.
He was just checking up on me.
What began as casual messages quickly became the last words she would ever exchange with him. The Master Sergeant served in the U.S. Army for almost 20 years. He was even featured on the History Channel series Ultimate Soldier Challenge in 2013.
We're going to go full out just like we've done the entire challenge.
In 2018, when Errett and Livelsberger were dating, he started to open up about the struggles he was facing, at one point texting, "I have been spiraling down the last week or so. Sometimes I get so hopeless and depressed, by far the worst of my life."
He was really open about the trauma he faced and the teammates he lost.
On December 29th, Livelsberger sent pictures of the Cybertruck he rented.
He sent some front views and he shared he felt like he was Batman or Halo.
It wasn't until 2 days later, when the FBI contacted Errett, that she found out what happened in Las Vegas.
They started to show me a video of him in the Cybertruck. My whole heart broke for him. That he was so broken that he got to that place.
Errett is still struggling with why Livelsberger would take his own life.
He didn't say anything explicit that would have triggered it, I guess.
Well, his nearly 20 years of military service, Livelsberger saw multiple combat deployments. The FBI describing the incident in Las Vegas as a tragic case of suicide by a highly decorated service member struggling with PTSD and other issues, guys.
That is, I think, really a fundamental point here. I do believe this guy was radicalized, clearly. I mean, right, that's not much of a stretch. But the fact that he was so damaged by the concussive injuries that he had spoken of, he'd lost part of his hearing, he had repeated headaches, he had, from battle, there were a number of physical manifestations of everything that he'd been through, and the psychological manifestations coexist with all of that. And that, I think, on some level underpins a lot of what happened. But the one-offs we're seeing and the inability of our society, and I'm talking about really the institutions of society, to deal with soldiers as they come out of these theaters of war, it's a problem. And these kind of stochastic terrorism, the one-off terrorism, the lone wolf terrorism, it does fit into a pattern. And so it is that when you're frustrated, when you're physically being affected in torturous ways, I mean, these are tormenting headaches that he complained about, I think you become more, shall we say, vulnerable to things that might affect you on a societal level. And clearly that was the case here. That's Law and Disorder for today.
Tune in again next time for more Law and Disorder on The Mark Thompson Show.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out there.
I do have some good news, sort of, and I have some weird news, offbeat news, sort of. So I want to get,
The Mark Thompson Show.
I don't want you to think it's all Downerville today. I do have some, and you know what this is, Tony? It's our last chance, I think, potentially, to use Bowling with Biden.
Thanks, Tony.
So here it is. Bowling with Biden.
article. I'm making sure I didn't delete it. Here we go.
Oh, my God. Here we go.
Live from White House Lanes, it's Bowling with Biden.
It's go time! This man's gonna win a lot of political offices.
Now, here's your Bowling with Biden host, Mark Thompson.
Biden is going out strong, everybody. He is going to block oil drilling across 625 million acres of U.S. waters. He's going to sign memoranda prohibiting future oil and gas leasing across parts of the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the northern Bering Sea. It's quite an action, and it reflects the way that he's racing to cement his legacy on climate change and on conservation in his last weeks in office. Trump's energy policy, as you know, is drill, baby, drill. And so he'll work to challenge this decision. Biden is going to issue 2 memorandums that prohibit future federal oil and gas leasing across large swaths of the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and the northern Bering Sea in Alaska. The oil and gas industry has long prized the eastern Gulf of Mexico in particular as a key part of offshore production plans. There's a big bunch of oil under the Gulf, and it's a question of exploiting drilling there to make that oil extraction successful. But Biden is walling it off. The White House not responding to requests for comment. The move could have the biggest impact in that Gulf of Mexico. That's about 14% of the crude oil production in America. And the decision, it would seem, is going to have little effect on a stretch of the Atlantic from North Carolina to Florida. No drilling is underway there already. There is a weak amount of interest in that area. It's not likely to produce much pushback. So the Bering Sea is interesting because it's off the coast of western Alaska, and it's the home of a lot of migrating marine animals, whales and the walruses and ice seals there, and they're hunted by a lot of Alaskan natives. And Obama issued an executive order that prohibited oil and gas exploration across 112,000 square miles of marine habitat in that northern Bering Sea. Obama called for tribal co-management of that area. And environmentalists now are praising Biden's plan, saying that they would prevent future oil spills and the destruction of a lot of coastal communities and marine wildlife if drilling were to go on. I mean, the industry defends its safety record, but let's be honest, we all know better. A huge move in the last hours of the Biden administration to block oil drilling across 625 million acres of U.S. waters. And that's Bowling with Biden.
That's all for this edition.
There's your new leader.
But join us again next time for Bowling with Biden.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to use Bowling with Biden anymore, Tony. It's a sad, it's a sad day. Yeah.
It'd be weird to keep using it, but I mean, we could.
You're right.
Thanks, Tony.
We could. I also have some chunk of Trump news that's not even related to Donald Trump. Shall we try that? Why not? Here is your chunk of Trump.
Open wide.
Ready?
Here comes your chunk of Trump.
It's my favorite food.
With your first bite, here's Mark Thompson.
I have a feeling it's going to be beautiful.
Well, this is not Donald Trump. It's Melania Trump.
What?
I know. Melania Trump signs a huge Amazon movie deal with Jeff Bezos and the Prime crew over there at Amazon Prime. Billionaire Amazon and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos is riding the lucrative red wave cash cow this year through his Prime Video service, partnering now with Melania Trump to release a film about Melania in theaters. That was the statement that Tony had up there. Tony, put it back up, and I'll just read it real quick. The statement is from the Amazon people. Amazon Prime Video has exclusively licensed an upcoming documentary film for both theatrical and streaming release that will give viewers an unprecedented behind-the-scenes look at First Lady Melania Trump. The project is executive produced by Fernando Soluchin, New Element Media, and Mrs. Trump, with Brett Ratner, Rat Pack Entertainment, attached to direct. Filming began in December of 2024 with an anticipated release of the second half of 2025. Prime Video will be sharing more details on the project as filming progresses and release plans are finalized. We are excited, they say, to share this truly unique story with our millions of customers around the world. Well, Jeff Bezos ripped off a $1 million check, you'll remember, to the inauguration, as did, he's not alone. I mean, there are all these $1 million checks being cut by these gazillionaires, checks that were written to Trump for his inauguration. What a great way to put money in the pocket of Donald Trump and Trump Inc. And Jeff Bezos, and you'll remember he stood in the way of there being an op-ed that would endorse Kamala Harris for president. He now, it would appear, is very much about Melania Trump. So Melania, who was kind of in the shadows a bit, doesn't talk a lot. There are many people, I told you not to do this, but many people did. When she didn't speak, everybody said, oh, she's being held hostage. She hates all of this, everything Trump is doing. As it turns out, she's maybe even more right-wing than her husband. She will serve as the executive producer with Brett Ratner and that Fernando Soluchin. And I'd look for it to come out, as they said, in the latter part of 2025. Meantime, a cartoonist has quit who did a cartoon about the fact that many of these wealthy entities, Amazon, Google, Disney, they are sending Trump money for his inauguration. Here is the cartoon that did not run in the Washington Post. It was nixed by the Post. It was supposed to run there. And for those just listening, it's 4 people holding bags of money beneath a huge statue, or it's not a statue, but it was like that kind of thing. It's a raised platform where a cartoonish version, the lower part of Trump, you see, is standing. And Mickey is in color, Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse is face down as they all sort of prostrate themselves to this huge figure. That cartoon, again, was nixed, rejected by the paper outright. No suggestions for potential changes. David Shipley, the Washington Post editorial page editor, said in a statement that the cartoon was rejected because of its similarity to columns at the paper, not because of who it targeted. So Ann Telnace, who is a brilliant and high-profile cartoonist, there she is, she has resigned and no longer will provide her cartoons with the Washington Post. Her departure is the latest of several internal shakeups at the Post. Publisher and CEO Will Lewis took over the paper last year, has clashed with the newsroom. Several top editors at the paper have left since Lewis took over. She, this cartoonist, Telnace, I don't know how she says her name, Telnace, she won the Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning. And she wrote in her blog that she had worked for the Post since 2008. So it's a significant pushing away from the table from this Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist. And that is your chunk of Trump.
That's it for this edition.
Well, I really enjoyed it.
But make sure to join us again next time.
I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening.
For another chunk of Trump.
Right on, everybody. Right on.
The Mark Thompson Show.
If you're just joining us, it is great to have you here. Happy New Year. I know January 6th is a day that we talked about in the first hour being reinvented by the right and by Donald Trump and his hench people. But it is clearly a dark day, one of the darkest days in the history of this country. And it reflects what was the culmination of a coup attempt in every way. Fake electors, legal challenges, which are legal. You can challenge an election legally. And so there were recounts demanded, again, also legal. But ultimately, the fake elector scheme, the plan to create chaos, changes at the Justice Department, demands to announce that the election was in doubt as far as its legitimacy, all of these things to sow chaos and then possibly to declare martial law, culminating in the violent coup attempt at the Capitol. All of these things leave us with a cloud around this day, and we recognize that cloud here, and I've discussed a lot of it in the first hour of this show. I have a couple of offbeat stories that I would like to share with you. Can I do that, Tony? I'm thinking in particular of before and then I can get back to some policy, and I have Karen Dawn coming up. Mm-hmm. Karen is going to tell us, and this is important. I'm glad I just mentioned this as an aside, but it's really important. This could be a front and center issue for Donald Trump in his first 6 months as president, and that's bird flu. This is the next pandemic knocking at our door, and Karen Dawn will be along and we'll talk about that. So stay tuned. I mean, she will be here and will lay bare what is happening and how it's essentially being ignored and being normalized, but more than anything, just its origins and how it's progressing. She will do that in our segment that we call It's the Planet Stupid. So, I see. This is from John. Let me just read this quickly. John says, January 6th was not a coup attempt. The electors were not fake. And the protesters were just protesting an election that they thought was stolen. Okay, I assume, John, you're being sarcastic, right? If you are being sarcastic, yeah. Trump will just call bird flu another hoax if it starts spreading among humans. Yeah, well, that really does look as though it's the course. This is a weird, Luis says, Mark, the bozos in New Orleans didn't even have concepts of a plan. They just wanted to keep Bourbon Street for profit. It's the usual profit over security. Thank you, Luis, for the super chat for $5. And I will tell you, I think that there is some truth to that. I mean, it's really reminiscent of that scene in Jaws where the mayor of that beach town says, you know, you can't close the beaches on whatever it was, Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day weekend. Was that it? You can't close the beaches. You can't tell people there's been a shark attack. And this is, you know, businesses depend on people coming to the beach. And I think there is a healthy dose of this. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with prioritizing those businesses and the commercial districts that depend on those tourists. That's why you should protect the tourists. We identified it the very moment it happened. The moment our show went on, right after this whole thing went down, we said, I don't mean to, I understand in the shadow of this horror, we're all downcast. And I don't mean to point to anything in particular in this moment of mourning, but this shouldn't have happened. I mean, you can still have mass casualty events, and they can be produced in all sorts of different ways. And sadly, with the internet there to spread information on how to produce these things, with radicalized ISIS sympathizers spread throughout the land, with people radicalized in all these different ways around all these different issues, these mass casualty events feel as though they are more likely than they might have been, shall we say, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, certainly. But you can still take precautions to protect those people who are there on Bourbon Street and in other places where there are large numbers of people celebrating or gathering. And that is on you as a public official in New Orleans and beyond. You have the Super Bowl, you have the Sugar Bowl, you have Bourbon Street, you have regular influxes of tourists on a level that most cities typically don't have, and still you dropped your guard this way? To me, it's unforgivable. It's absolutely unforgivable. Well, we were going to get them in position. We have these new bollards for these new blockades that were going to go up for Super Bowl. F that, man. Why Super Bowl? Super Bowl's coming up in a few weeks. You couldn't just crank up the hurry up machine by 3 weeks to make sure they were in place around Christmas time and New Year's? Sorry. Weak. Hula Steph, how about a big shout out for a $20 contribution to the show? I have to tell you something. We're crowd-funded. I make a big deal out of the part of the crowd that funds.
Big shout out.
Yes. Thank you, Hula Steph. Love that. Thank you. By the way, just because I've mentioned it, and then I will get to this odd story about this odd lady, and then we'll get to Karen Dawn. But I will tell you that we are completely dependent and also grateful for the way in which our Patreon and PayPal communities have grown. Under every video, there is a link to Patreon and PayPal, and through those links, you can become part of the community that sustains this show. Honestly, we would not be here without our Patreon and PayPal communities. Yes, we're on YouTube, but the YouTube money is just not enough to keep this show going. And I love doing the show, and I love visiting with you all, but you can see, you know, we have Tony, we have Albert, we have Kim, we have expenses, we have hard expenses, we have soft expenses, and all of these things couldn't possibly be serviced by the revenue that YouTube brings in. I mean, it doesn't even come close. So the way you guys have stepped up, you're the reason we're here 2 years later. So thank you. Patreon and PayPal, some of you have even, I'll acknowledge this tomorrow, stepped up your support. You've been supporters and you've increased your support, and I so appreciate that. Again, the links are under all our videos on YouTube, and if you're listening across the audio universe of podcasts, we're themarkthompsonshow.com, and if you go to themarkthompsonshow.com, you can click through to Patreon and PayPal in the same way and support the show on an ongoing basis. Thank you again, all of you, for your support into the new year. Smash that like button.
Smashed it with your iron rod.
Smash it with your iron rod. Wow, I want to get you this one story.
The Mark Thompson Show.
This is a bizarre story that socialite who married a super wealthy art world guy. She was a beautiful woman and became part of the tabloid world because of her Catwoman look, which was the result of so many plastic surgeries. She had a bitter divorce and exotic cosmetic surgeries, and that brought her to tabloid fame. She just passed away in Paris at her home. She was 79. Her name is Jocelyn Wildenstein. She was a member of one of the wealthiest families in the French art world, with a vast and mysterious collection of old masters, as well as galleries in New York and Tokyo. She was the only child of a clothier and a lawyer. And among her friends, Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi arms dealer. She traveled in high society. Beautiful, athletic, up for adventure, many say. She and her husband met while hunting game in Africa. But in 1997, after 19 years of marriage and 2 kids, he wanted to see other people, and they were living apart. He was in a townhome in Manhattan, and she was at their ranch in Kenya. And when she, escorted by 2 bodyguards, surprised her husband at the townhouse in Manhattan, she found him in bed with his 21-year-old girlfriend.
What?
Yeah. He pulled a gun. Bodyguards called the police, and he spent the night in jail. And then their divorce played out across the tabloids. The tabloid press noted all of their excesses, monthly expenditures of $1 million, the $350,000 Chanel dress that she'd bought for a New Year's Eve party. There he is next to one of the pieces of art that they own. Her yearly phone bill was $60,000. The $80,000 that he reportedly paid a fashion photographer to create a portfolio for a young Russian model with whom he was having an affair. Their East 64th Street townhouse, home to 10 Bonar paintings, a black leopard, a lynx, and a sand shark that lived in a wall-sized tank. They had a 66,000-acre African ranch and game preserve where 2 tigers lived in a bulletproof glass cave overlooking a pool. The his and hers plastic surgeries, eye lifts mostly to him, and most notably her metamorphosis from a delicate featured young woman, she was quite beautiful when she was young, Tony showed you some pictures, into an otherworldly being with cat-like eyes at a cost estimated to be $2 million. It captivated tabloids, and you see the result of it there. They called her the Catwoman. She has always maintained that she's never had plastic surgery. And by 1999, a divorce settlement had been reached, widely reported to have been $2.5 billion. Also, the ranch in Africa, and $100 million in alimony for 13 years. She, of course, became a cautionary tale for cosmetic excess. This self-improvement project went terribly wrong, but her story, a fascinating one, and now she is gone, dead at 79.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
Right on, everybody, right on. Great to have everyone here, as I've said over and over. And you know why I've said it over and over? Because it's true. That's why. Yeah, you're damn straight. It's great to have everybody here. I am going to get to a few comments, those who agree with me, those who disagree with me. You're all welcome here. So we will, it's just like my home, you know? I walk home, it's the same deal. I walk into the house, there are people who agree with me, people who disagree with me. It's fine. I don't love you any less. The month wouldn't be complete without kicking it off the first Monday of every month with a discussion about animals. And we do it in a segment we call A Word About Animals.
Now, a word about animals on the Mark Thompson Show.
Put it together for someone who does such great work monitoring the world of animals, monitoring how animals are discussed and issues around animals are discussed worldwide through media, through Dawn Watch. It's a robust group of people with that same interest on Facebook and on her website. How about it for Karen Dawn? Karen, Happy New Year. And
Happy New Year to you guys.
It looks to me like there is a giant problem brewing in this country and worldwide, and it's around bird flu. Can you bring us up to speed on what your research has shown and what the many variables associated with this emerging problem might involve?
What's really wild is that if you look online as to how much of an issue it is for humans, you get all sorts of varying and different information. But I, of course, track what's going on with animals. And so when I put out my year-end Dawn Watch end-of-year roundup about what was going on with animals, bird flu was the #1 story because we started off the beginning of last year, 2024, with it on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. And now here we are a year later, and a few days ago is on the front page of the Los Angeles Times again. During that year, we've gone from, gosh, it's a year ago, traveling through lots and lots of birds, to thousands of sea mammals being washed up on the shores in South America. Seals dead, colonies absolutely being infested because it had been spread to various mammals. And towards the end of last year, we had a big cat sanctuary, pumas and all these big cats in the sanctuary in Washington state lose 20 big cats to bird flu. So this is a story that's being somewhat underreported, but it is so out there. As far as humans go, we do not have many cases yet amongst humans in the United States. The best I could find out worldwide, it looks like about 500 people have died so far. What is truly frightening is that when we do have cases of it amongst humans, I just sent this to Tony. It's funny, and there's no way he could possibly have gotten it yet. But I thought, just in case, I'm a few minutes later. But it looks like amongst humans, the mortality rate could be as high as 50%.
Wow.
Now, COVID's was something like 1 in a few hundred, and that took us to our knees. So if this mortality rate of this bird flu is really going to be as high as 50% amongst humans, COVID was like a joke as compared to what we've got coming. And we have entirely brought this upon ourselves. I mean, it started in the factory farms. And as much as, you got the Los Angeles Times saying things like, well, it seemed, we don't know how it spread, but it seems to be that wild birds migrating have dumped it on birds elsewhere. Something I dug up, and which has, again, been wildly underreported, is that, and I found this in Forbes magazine, who'd found this on the CDC website or something, but it's not being shared widely, is that we are still doing something that I first learned was a no-no during the mad cow disease outbreaks, which is we are feeding waste from some animals to other animals as food. And so waste from the bird industry, the factory farming industry, has been fed in the United States and is still being fed to cows as food. And then they're wondering, how is bird flu getting into the dairy industry? I mean, they have traced the avian flu in this bird waste that is going to cows. So how can there really be a question? Now, apparently in California, they say they've stopped feeding bird waste to currently lactating dairy cows. Okay, that's good. But these dairy cows are very often on the same farms as the beef cows. They are still feeding this avian waste to. So how can
wasn't there something like that, Karen? I didn't interrupt, but I was just going to ask you. I feel like Mad Cow has some kind of aspect to that same.
That's what I just mentioned. That's how I knew even to look this up, because you and I, we're not going to pretend we're in our 20s and we're old enough to remember mad cow disease, and that's what was happening, was that the reason that was spreading was because they realized that they were feeding one industry of animals with the waste from a different industry of animals, thinking it would be safe because the different species did not get the same disease. Now we're a little older, we're a little wiser. Science has moved on a little bit, and they realize that these diseases mutate, and that when you have two animals on the same farm being exposed to each other, you will often get the diseases jumping from one animal to another and mutating. And when they get into pigs, for some reason, and pigs have been affected with this avian flu, from pigs it goes easily to humans because there's a reason that when they try to transplant organs from other animals to humans, they use pigs because we do have more similar physiology to them than we do to birds. So these diseases mutate. When you feed waste of one animal to another animal in a factory farm because it's cheaper, and we're talking about vegetarian animals, they're not supposed to be eating the waste.
Right, they don't. Exactly. The whole thing is so ridiculous to begin with.
They're supposed to be grazing, but that's too expensive. It's cheaper to feed them the crap of another species because it's expensive to get rid of that crap, and you get in trouble if you dump it into the rivers. So let's just feed it to another species and then wonder why avian flu. I almost said mad cow disease because it's here we go again. When are we going to learn? Now, mad cow disease didn't kill all that many people, and COVID didn't kill all that many people, but avian flu is looking bad. It's looking really scary. And it is not under control. And the Los Angeles Times is at least reporting on the fact that we're not really tracking it carefully. We did let it get into the milk supply. We didn't shut down the farms where it was in the milk supply. And but we're still saying things like, gosh, we wonder how it's spreading. Meanwhile, we're doing crazy things with animals on factory farms, just crazy.
So this H5N1, the bird flu, one of the things, and you've just alluded to it, that LA Times piece, which you so smartly put into your roundup and to your newsletter, one of the things it points to is as I say, something that you just kind of alluded to, which is that we're not tracking it. There are whole parts of the Central Valley, and of course the Central Valley is the hot zone for it, potentially, because there are so many dairy farms and animals and cattle and chicken farms, et cetera, there. It's not monitoring the wastewater. There's no, they are incredibly undermanned when it comes to trying to monitor wastewater, which apparently is the greatest kind of ongoing metric that you can find for how bad the infection is among humans.
They're not monitoring it. And there's a reason for that. And, you know, it's what we've learned about the power of lobby groups. But if they were carefully monitoring what was going on with avian flu, and they were acknowledging that as of now, we've got suggestions that it could be 50% fatal when it spreads to humans. There's no way that these farms on which they found it, which is 1/10 of dairy farms in California, there's no way that they could keep operating and keep putting out milk to the public and keep having workers on the farms exposed to these dairy cows who have this disease.
So you're saying so because of that, you're saying it's deliberate. They don't want to find the numbers.
I would call it willful ignorance because the farm lobby keeps the government going, and they would have to be shutting down these farms if they were acknowledging how out of control this is getting. And I included in my roundup a study which really shocked me, which is that when they studied the workers on these farms for antibodies, they found out that 7% of the workers on these farms had these avian flu antibodies. And these guys had been out in the community wandering around. And then they're wondering, you know, when a girl comes down with it and she's very, very, very ill, like one of the only 2 cases so far that are acknowledged as avian flu, having actually gotten into and infected a person. This teenage girl almost died. They're wondering, how could you possibly have caught it? And then on the other hand, we have the workers on these factories out in the community wandering around with avian flu antibodies. So I'm worried, and I tend not to be an alarmist person, but I'm worried that we might be where we were with COVID back in 2019. We might be there with avian flu now. And avian flu looks like it's a lot more deadly. So we're in trouble. And it's because of the way we are treating animals. And, you know, a Dawn Watch subscriber had a letter in the LA Times, one of the few papers, you know, where they're open to printing these letters that challenge the agricultural lobby. And it just said, if we're wondering what's going on, why is it, you know, avian flu spreading to the dairy industry, and why is it possibly going out into the community. She just asked, we might want to ask ourselves why we are still drinking the milk of other species. And thank heavens, we've started to realize this isn't necessary and that plant-based milks are a really big chunk of the milk market at the moment. It's, up around 30% at the moment. And Starbucks last year, one of the big stories, finally stopped upcharging for non-dairy milk. But we've got to get over this idea that we think we can't survive without dairy when we find out that 10% of dairy farms are infected with bird flu, and this is dangerous. So we've just got to wake up. And Mark, you and I are vegan. We don't yell at people, you've got to go vegan. But on the other hand, when you've got 10% of California dairy farms infected with avian flu, do we want to think about whether the dairy industry might not be the best thing to be promoting at the moment, or whether we might want to start looking at getting our milk elsewhere? And I think it might be tough, without trying to be preachy about it, this is a little bit crazy.
I don't know where you get this, John. It says bird flu is not a deadly virus. I think it does have a mortality rate, as Karen Dawn was saying, that's fairly high. Isn't that correct?
I just sent, if Tony wants to open it up, I emailed him an article I hope got through, and it was from the CBC, and that's where it says that it is a mortality rate of about 50% when it gets into humans, about 50%. So where do we get it? Well, no, I don't get it on.
Yeah, that's from the CDC. I mean, sorry, John, but on that one, I mean, it's and this is the
spread widely amongst humans, but when it does spread amongst humans, it's really deadly.
Before I let you go, and this has been great that we've talked about this, because I really feel as though this is an emerging issue, and as I've just mentioned, it may be the issue. I mean, from the standpoint of public health, the issue that this new administration may have to deal with. And they may try to explain it away like they did the last one. It's going to go away with the warm weather, whatever they say. But the reality is, here it is, based on available human case data to date, the case fatality rate of avian influenza, that is H5N1, is approximately 52%. So,
Tony, thank you for grabbing that when I sent it so late. But when we do have folks like John saying, I don't know where you get this.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah. Respiratory failure is the most common cause of death. Other complications may include multi-organ failure, pulmonary hemorrhage. Is it pneumothorax? I don't know. And a lot of bad stuff. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of the stuff that'll be happening to us if we get it.
And again, these dairy workers, 7% of them were walking around in the community with antibodies. So they are going to be bringing it out into the community. And, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be highly catchy. But we learned with COVID, these things mutate.
Sure, exactly. Milk is safe if homogenized, says Gordon. I mean, it is true that homogenization takes a lot of those dangerous pathogens out. Isn't that true, Karen Dawn?
This is true, but Gordon, I don't know if he wrote that. I don't know if he's not really listening. But the milk may or may not be safe. The dairy farms where the workers are working are not safe. Workers are catching this disease from the cows and bringing it out into the community.
He means pasteurized, yeah, but homogenized or whatever. I think that's.
Mark, I don't know if you heard my answer. It's not.
Yeah, I did. You're saying it.
Milk. It's the workers.
It's the workers, right? The workers are clearly being affected in big numbers. I mean, fairly substantial numbers.
The community, yeah.
It is. So I mean, so let me
help.
This
young girl who almost died from it. They don't know how she caught it. She wasn't working on a dairy farm, so it is somehow starting to spread through the community. So even if the milk might be safe if it's pasteurized, the milk industry is not safe.
Yeah, and let me just suggest, this is what all the articles that you read about when it comes to bird flu are suggesting, that, hey, it is in that dairy worker to somebody else, we just mentioned it, Karen Dawn just mentioned it, that you begin the first human-to-human transmission, and then you're off to the races, okay? So I get it. The milk is fine because it's pasteurized, fine. But the workers who made the milk, if you want to think of it that way, they aren't safe, and it's not just about them. It's about their ability to transmit the disease to others, and then the contagion continues from there. It's a very serious issue. The last thing I wanted to mention, there it is, current situation.
I'm smiling at your communication skills, Mark. It's like, yep, that summarizes it beautifully.
From the CDC, H5 bird flu is widespread in wild birds worldwide, is causing outbreaks in poultry and U.S. dairy cows, with several recent human cases in U.S. dairy and poultry workers. This, again, is from the CDC website. While the current public health risk is low, CDC is watching the situation carefully and working with states to monitor people with animal exposures. CDC is using its flu surveillance systems to monitor for H5 bird flu activity in people. But again, the surveillance system is not being used in the Central Valley of California. I mean, it's insane. That's a population that's wildly exposed to this. So I don't know how you can say you've periscoped up with your surveillance when an entire swath of this country that is most affected is being ignored. So,
and I just have to say again with that, it's in the wild bird community. I'm scared they're going to start killing off, wild birds and blaming them for this possibly coming pandemic. When again, how can you be blaming the wild birds when you are feeding the droppings of poultry farms to dairy farms? I mean, and then or not dairy farms, to cows on other farms who, of course, can easily transmit it to the dairy farms. I mean, how can you be blaming the wild birds? But
yeah, it is.
Nobody wants to be broadcasting that we're feeding poop to cows on farms.
Karen, thanks for the info. Looking forward to helping you grow Dawn Watch this year, because it's a great resource. The work you do all the time. I'm always struck by some things that I thought I knew, and then there's additional information I didn't know, and some things that I didn't know at all. So I encourage everybody to follow Karen Dawn and Dawn Watch on Facebook. There is, as I mentioned, a robust community of supporters there, and you can also find her at dawnwatch.com. And there you'll find everything more. I'm trying to find the, Kim's not here today, so I have to do all this myself. Where is Karen Dawn's dawnwatch.com? Here it is. Thank you. Karen Dawn at dawnwatch.com. Just for my sense of order, I had to see it. Thanks, Karen. We hope for the best, but fear the worst on the bird flu thing, and we look forward to our next conversation and many more conversations in the year ahead. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Karen Dawn, everybody.
Join the flock again next time for a word about animals on the Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah, thank you. I am so excited that we have successfully completed a show, and I didn't know that we would, because I'm missing my darling Kim, as you know. She and the whole McAllister family, my thoughts are with them, having lost the father
Kim, how are you?
of my darling Kim's family. And it is something that is shared, that those sympathies are shared by much of our audience. And I'm going to get to some of those in a second. What is this from Doug? Doug says, I will have to find a good boutique meat market and dairy farm. Okay, good luck, Doug. There's a guy committed to his dairy and meat. All right, thanks for the $20 super chat on that. Bring back powdered eggnog, a 1970s invention. Yeah, there's that. I also wanted to note this on the matter of Kim. It's Keith K. says, Mark, me and my wife Kathleen love your show. Sorry to hear about Kim's father. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the super chat, though, Keith. A $20 super chat. I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. We're all very sorry and disheartened to hear about Kim's dad, for sure. Honestly, so sorry to Kim and her family. Hope this helps your bottom line in addition to the Patreon, Lori says. Lori Dolly with a 2025 super chat. Really does help. And Lori, you're a great supporter of the show. So grateful. And thank you both for your sympathies extended to Kim's family and also for your support of the show. I like Karen's pretty long hair, says, who said that? Rose, yeah. She had kind of wild lighting today, didn't she, Tony? She had kind of like a...
Well, I think that just her window was open. And it was just a perfect right on her.
Yeah, it was kind of a noirish thing. Somebody mentioned that. I thought that was a good read. Wes, thank you for a super sticker. You are an OG of the show, and I appreciate it. Big shout out to you and everybody who supports the show. Also, to Psycho Mog Resurrect. Thank you for the $5.
Nice. Big shout out.
Do you know what that is, Tony?
No, it sounded right the way you said it.
It also, I just felt like it was something that you knew about, like it's a gamer thing or something. You know?
No.
Thanks, Tony.
No. Pam says this: Republicans and Democrats destroyed the law that limited the amount of media outlets a corporation could own. Why? Corporate donations, money out of politics. Of course, Pam, I screamed about that at the time. It was in the 90s. It was during Clinton. And that's when America was turned on its side. During the
totally
Bill Clinton,
changed.
The world changed. The media world changed.
Market changed. That's right when I got into radio.
Money out of politics. Bravo, Pam. Pam Pierce, thank you for that comment. Wes said, I had no idea that Kim lost her dad. So sorry. A little extra for expenses. A $10 super chat. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, very, very tough news on Kim's father. What is this? What is this? I call this out for free on 21st Century Suffragettes channel. Free? Okay. Is that somebody paying for a plug? That's Benny Loco, who's normally a big supporter of the show. So I guess I couldn't follow it. But good luck
Sometimes.
with 21st Suffragettes. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, it's a robot ad? Is that what that was?
Oh.
It's a No, Benny Loco's been on the show before and made contributions and a bunch of other stuff. So, all right. You know what? I don't like to do it, but
The Mark Thompson Show.
I must. What is it, Tony?
Well, I was going to bring up one thing, the email you sent.
Hang on a second. Hold on. Hold the roll. Hold the roll. All right, go. What's the email?
You sent me an email. It's about the Rose Parade float.
Oh. Love the show, Mark. I'm so appreciative of the efforts that you, Kim, Tony, and Albert put into the show. Tony gets a name check in an email that we're showing. I love
Thanks,
that.
Tony.
Yeah.
Undeserved.
And you keep me entertained and informed, Lee says. I love the commentary on the Rose Parade float. My son was one of the student builders. Now I remember this. Sorry, it's been a couple days. My son was one of the student builders welding big pieces into the chassis with the team for the Cal Poly Pomona San Luis Obispo float. I remember this float, Nessie's Lakeside Laughs. I'm sure he listens to the Mark Thompson Show when he has time. Also, he knows his mom and made sure to give me the perfect Christmas present. Cheers, Lee. Now, the Christmas present, there he is in front of the float that he helped build. I love it. We talked about the Rose Parade last week. It's an amazing thing but you understand, usually they're big companies building these floats. These guys built this float together, and it was a cool float. There you see Nessie top center, the Loch Ness Monster, and you see the team. I really got a kick out of this email. That's why I pushed it on to Tony. I love this email, and I love that these guys all built this float together. Bravo. It's so difficult to do, and as someone who has spent a lot of time around the Rose Parade effort and, in those various warehouses where they spend months building this stuff, it's pretty cool to see it come together, and you guys did a great job with that
and
float.
Welding, a very practical skill, a very good skill to have, welding.
Yeah, very impressive. Welder. Now, this is what her son gave her for Christmas, a chit bug. It's a chit. Would you call it a mug? What is that, a mug or a, what do you call that? Not a mug, this is the mug, right?
Yeah.
What do you call that?
No.
Cup?
Let me see. I'll check right now. Travel mug.
Travel mug. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah. All right. It's the travel mug. Chit. I love that. Absolutely love it. Clearly, people of impeccable taste. And you can enjoy your coffee with me. I'm enjoying it right now, the Coachella Valley coffee. Tumbler also. It's being called a tumbler by Tiffany. I think that's a good call. Tumbler. Or by Mindy. Yeah. Mindy
but
and Tiffany both had
merch
tumbler.
site, it is the travel mug.
Travel mug, though,
site.
if you're looking at the site.
Yes.
Getmarkmerch.com. You missed out on the pre-holiday sale. They had a sale going for the whole month of December. Now you got to pay a little bit more. But let me tell you, it's worth it when you get. Oh, yes. That is the mug. And then the phrase on the back of this one is, we could try ignoring it, sir. But you can see that she got a chit, which is terrific. We could try ignoring it, sir. But bravo. Yeah. Lee, loved your communication, loved your email, loved the love. There was a lot of love. Chit, baby. Chit into the new year.
The Mark Thompson Show.
If you want to drop us a line, you can. We have an email address. I know that's a very big boy thing that I got when I got this channel. It is the Mark Thompson Show at gmail.com. And when I say we, I mean I read your emails, as I do all the comments, the good and the bad. I will share a couple more with you later this week. And you can also visit themarkthompsonshow.com and click Patreon or PayPal to support the show, be part of that community. But I'm always happy to get email. Well, I shouldn't say always. Sometimes the email can be a little rough. TheMarkThompsonShow at gmail.com is our address. Tomorrow, great show, David K. Johnston and the comic impressionist J.L. Coven. It's going to be strong. We'll be talking Trump and more.
I'm Shadow Stevens for The Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
There's no after party live today, as you know, because of Kim's situation.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
Well, out of time, but we will see you tomorrow. Tony, thank you, and a Happy New Year all. Bye-bye.
See you.